This video is Unit 5. We'll be doing one video on the endocrine system and then a series of videos on the reproductive system and development. So just a quick review. The endocrine system, just like all systems in the body, basically use the same signal transduction pathway, reception, transduction, response in order to work, except for in the endocrine system, the reception part is going to be, or the signal molecule is going to be a hormone almost every time. And that hormone has a particular target cell. And so the hormone is always going to have a cell that it is going directly to. So what do I mean by that? So here you have a hormone that is released by some sort of cell into the blood, and there is a particular target for that hormone. Other cells will not interact with it. How do they know? Well, there's the little receptor molecules on the cell surface that only interacts with particular hormones, and that's how they're able to parse that out. There are three different kinds of systems that we'll look at. One of them is called Exocrine, which this picture doesn't show Exocrine, but I'm going to write it down anyway. And an exocrine gland is a gland that releases its hormone into a duct or tube to travel to another portion of the body, but usually into a cavity or onto a surface, like sweat glands release sweat in through sweat ducts onto the skin. The bile, or the gallbladder and liver, release bile through the bile duct into the small intestine. And so these organs have exocrine functions in that they release hormones directly onto or into something. Endocrine function, so endo means inside, that may be a helpful clue. Endocrine glands release their hormone directly into the blood system, which is what you see right here. We'll also talk about neurosecretory hormones. A neurosecretory hormone is just another way of talking about chemicals that the brain releases. We will talk about chemicals that the brain releases, such as like the hypothalamus and the pituitary, which we'll get to in just a moment. And we've talked about this before too. Some hormones are received on the cell membrane. Those are the polar hormones are received on the cell membrane because they can't pass through, whereas some hormones are passed directly through the cell membrane. These are the non-polar hormones. They pass, like a steroid or something like that, passes directly through the cell membrane into the nucleus to cause some sort of cellular response. One thing that we will talk about a lot with hormone systems is feedback loops. There are negative and positive feedback loops. A negative feedback loop is essentially when the product, as you can see down here, this particular system is often given as an example, the product T3 and T4 turn off the process that made them start. And so when T3 and T4 are produced, the presence of those hormones in the body causes the hypothalamus and the pituitary, which are parts of the brain, and those parts of the brain can sense that those hormones are in the body. They will turn off the process that causes T4 and T3 to be produced in the first place. And so it's basically a way to shut off the production of something. There are other examples of positive feedback loops, and there are several in the body. Here's an example here that this particular feedback loop, when you lose water, or it causes you to lose more water once the product is produced. Another feedback loop is the production of prolactin. When a baby is born and the baby begins nursing, the act of nursing causes more milk to be produced. And so, whereas the product, turning off the process in a negative feedback loop and a positive feedback loop, that product of the production of milk actually causes more of that to occur. So the more the baby needs, the more the baby eats, the more the baby will be fed. And so it makes sense for that particular mechanism. The major endocrine glands of the body are these two, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is the master control gland of homeostasis. All homeostatic functions are controlled by the hypothalamus. How does it do that? It receives information from the rest of the body that controls homeostasis. So your heart, your kidneys, all these major organs, thyroid, they all send info to that part of the brain. The brain receives it and then acts accordingly. And in that way, it releases hormones that basically tell the rest of the body what to do. Well, it only releases hormones to one portion, and that is the pituitary. So the hypothalamus directly communicates with the pituitary. The pituitary gland is split in two here, not important for our purposes. But the pituitary gland receives information from one source, and that is only the hypothalamus. It is basically the second in command. It receives these hormones from the hypothalamus, and those basically say turn something on or turn something off. Either way, at this point, the pituitary is able to then tell the rest of the body what to do. And so you can see lots of different targets here that the pituitary could be targeting, and therefore lots of different hormones. And so the pituitary in many ways is kind of like a field general, whereas the hypothalamus is more like a commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief sits behind the desk and basically tells people what to do. The field general is actually on the field doing the work of the battle or whatever it is. And so in this way, the hypothalamus receives that info, but the pituitary is actually telling the body what to do in response to that info.